Sometimes it'd probably be best. Thank y'all for being here tonight. I had a friend on Facebook said he was ready for it to go back to 92 instead of 97. I said, I'm ready for it to go back to fall. But you know what I mean? But we're moving right along in this study on grief we have tonight. And then next Wednesday night, we'll complete it. And tonight, we're going to talk, as it says up there, we're going to talk about the awfulness of a traumatic life experience. Now, we're going to go to Job as a launching point, and y'all probably know the story of Job quite well, but just in review, you know that he was a real person. He is the primary character mentioned in the book, and his name, they say, from Hebrew comes from a word that means persecution, meaning persecuted, or from Arabic, the one repentant, meaning repentant one. And so he lived in the land of Uz, and that was a real place. Scholars believe that it was the northernmost part of Saudi Arabia, connected with Edom, and south of Israel. And it was close to Midian, where Moses lived for 40 years. His home was, or all of his family's home was a walled city. There's a reference to that in Job 29, 7 and 8. And he was a man of great respect, great wealth. He had a great fear, a holy fear of God. He was a person known to have shunned evil and lived a blameless and upright life. He lived in the patriotic period prior to the giving of the law of Exodus. And so the head of the family was the priestly intercessor for his household. And you'll read, as you read in there, he prayed for his family every morning, particularly after they had their family gatherings, which lasted for a week. That you don't want to read too much in that. But this story is about his suffering, helping us to understand that suffering can come to us all. God's no respecter of persons. But it's also about God's sovereignty, that God's even in control when we think the world is falling apart. And then we read this here in a minute. I just want to mention to you who the Sabaeans are. They were from a place called Saba, S-A-B-A, or Sheba, present-day Yemen. We're still having problems there, right? They don't like us. The Chaldeans, or you may know them as Babylonian, but they ruled and lived in the Chaldeans lived in the southern part of Babylon, but we would know that a lot of the areas that they lived as present-day Iraq. So it's amazing to me how we talk about trouble here, and we still see a lot of trouble going on in the world today. So I want to just pick up in chapter 1. That's what Judy has on the screen for us, this New Living Translation. In fact, I'm going to back it up. Judy, don't worry about it. I'm going to back up to 6. One day the members of the heavenly court came to present themselves before the Lord, and the accuser, which I find that's very interesting, the accuser Satan came with him. Where have you come from? The Lord asked Satan, and Satan answered the Lord, I have been patrolling the earth, watching everything that's going on. Then the Lord asked Satan, have you noticed my servant Job? He is the finest man in all the earth. He is blameless, a man of complete integrity. He fears God and stays away from evil. And Satan replied to the Lord, yes, but Job has good reason to fear God. You have always put a wall of protection around him and his home and his property. You have made him prosper in everything he does. look how rich he is. And if you go back to the very first part of this chapter, you can see everything that he had. But reach out and take everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. Now, hang on to that curse you to your face here in just a minute. All right, you may test him, the Lord said. Said to Satan, do whatever you want with him. Do whatever you want. Let me start over. Do whatever you want with everything he possesses, but do not harm him physically. New King James says, basically, don't lay a hand on him. So Satan left the Lord's presence. And one day, Job's sons and daughters were feasting at the older brother's house, and a messenger arrived at Job's home with the news. Your oxen were plowing and with the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans raided us. They stole all the animals and killed all the farmhands. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. And now I want you to see this. These people with the message are kind of lining up. There's no gap in time. It's like one thing after another. And you may sometimes things going on in your life, and every time you turn around, something's happened. And you may have the tendency to say, well, what can happen next? Don't do that. Yeah. While he was speaking, wait a minute, number 2, 16. While he was speaking, another messenger arrived with the news. The fire of God has fallen from heaven and burned up your sheep and all the shepherds. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. Most commentators think that was probably a severe lightning storm. That, if I remember playing golf down in Gunnersville, and we were up on kind of a high hole, and lightning had just a couple of days had been a storm, had hit a tree, and it just skinned off all of the bark. So if you don't think lightning can get you, you better watch out. That's supposition. But anyhow, however it was, that happened then. Verse 17, while he was still speaking, a third messenger arrived with this news. 3 bands of Chaldean raiders have stolen your camels and killed your servants. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. And while he was still speaking, another messenger arrived with this news. Your sons and daughters were feasting in their oldest brother's home, and suddenly a powerful wind swept in from the wilderness and hit the house on all sides. The house collapsed, and all your children are dead. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. And Job stood up and tore his robe in grief. Then he shaved his head, and he fell to the ground to worship. And he said, I came naked from my mother's womb, and I will be naked when I leave. The Lord gave me what I had, and the Lord has taken it away. Praise the name of the Lord. In all of this, Job did not sin by blaming God. When Tim was a little boy, he had a Sesame Street book, and it was one of his favorite books. It was called Grover's Bad Awful Day. And that's the one he would always pull for Sandy to read. We never understood why. Job had a bad awful day. One thing after another. And we understand from our study what the definition of grief is. It's the adjusting to life that is changed, or the natural expected reaction to loss. Now, Job had it rough. And just by using him as an illustration, that's sure not to minimize those of you that have suffered traumatic losses, because they are what they are. He lost all of that. He was left with a few servants and a non-supportive wife. She said, and it's recorded in 2:9, do you still hold fast to your integrity, curse God, and die? Very similar to what Satan said. Did you see that? Now me, with my way I think, If Job lost all that, why didn't he go ahead and take her too? If she wasn't going to be any more supportive than that. You know, but see, that's because I'm not God. I think, she wasn't very helpful, right? Yeah. So they lost all of that. And his three friends, supposedly friends, turn on him. And they're basically wanting to know, you can read all of that. They're basically wanting to know, what'd you do wrong, Job? What made this all happen? Well, if you understand Scripture, Job had done nothing wrong. And I want people to understand that when traumatic things happen in our life, more likely no one's done anything wrong. Okay? It's just part of life. So, trauma, what it does, it disrupts relationships. Of course, we're relational people. Because trauma is a relational experience. Many times after traumatic things in life, there'll be divorces. Many times there'll be somebody will just can't ever get it together. But they're different. Trauma changes a lot in our lives. And there is hope. We can get over it. But it's tremendously hard. And it just doesn't come overnight. So, in all of that, there's going to be the question, where is God in all of this? And, Job went through a time of questioning God, remember? And God responds to him, oh, Job, where were you when I created the foundation of the earth? And so there's going to be things in life where we're not going to have the answer to the wise. We're just not. Even though I know it's natural for us to answer. So here's a classic definition of trauma if you pay any attention to that kind of stuff. Trauma is the experience of something shocking happening to someone that produces some kind of inner injury and affects the person's ability to function in normal ways. It knocks the props out of you, and you just don't know what to do next. Now, trauma within itself is not grief, but it will need to be grieved out because you've got to go through all of that. But trauma comes in, shakes your world up, and you've got all these questions because life really changed. It was an everyday thing. I remember as a boy, and all of you in here are, well, most of you, a couple of you aren't, and then some of you probably may have forgot it, but you probably remember where you were when you heard that John Kennedy had been assassinated. Yeah, I know exactly where I was. And my dad was the manager of a supermarket in town, and it was Thanksgiving weekend. And it was a terrible business weekend because he said everyone that was coming in was just kind of walking around in a daze. That's a classic trauma reaction. You don't know what to do because not all grief situations are traumatic, okay? Trauma is different than the loss in normal life. For example, if you have an elderly parent or grandparent, you know that day's coming. You can see them go down. My daughter-in-law, my ex-daughter-in-law told Jacob or Caitlin, one of the, said, now just remember, Pops can't do everything the way that he used to. She's right, though, because I can't do everything. Because, when they were younger, I was down in the floor with them and all of that. And today, if like many of you, when you see something on the floor that you have to pick up, you look to see if there's anything else while you're down there, right? But it's just just happening. Maybe a retirement that someone had planned for a long time. That's when that day happens. That's not trauma. If someone comes in and lets you go when you're not ready, that's traumatic. So we need to make sure that we're making that distinction, because in a natural grief situation, more than likely, we're going to be able to move on quicker than in a traumatized time. When 911, not 911, but when the Murrah building was blown up in Oklahoma City, I just left here, been out here at Fairview about a month. And my mother called me, and she's just bawling and squalling. And I thought, well, my dad's dead. You know, that's what I thought, because he traveled, but it was the Murrah building. And they had it on TV back there, and she said, oh, my goodness, they just put somebody in the back of a truck pickup, and they're taking them off. I mean, it was traumatic. In fact, the guy that was a few years older than me, went to school together, he worked. He was a custodian in that building, and he was there when the thing blew up, and he survived. And so he's gotten to the point where he does tours at the museum. Trauma takes a while to get over. And what trauma does, it invades. It just invades. It's something shocking, something that we never expected, and it grabs us, shakes our world. Job would qualify for a person who experienced trauma, one right after another. And it has a cumulative effect on us, traumas do, but sure. But what did he do? He grieved, but he bowed and worshiped God. Not even in that did he curse God. But then, you know, as you go on and read the story, his health fails, and the boils and the scraping of that, and you know. He had a rough time. That wife that turned on him, his friends are blaming him for his trouble. So, as I've already said, the book of Job is there to help us to understand God's sovereignty, but also to show us that trauma and struggling with change is part of life. It's part of life. I have been in too many emergency rooms in my life. I've had to tell too many people that their loved one has passed. I've had to make calls when I was doing chaplaincy with the police department, Madison County Sheriff's Department. I did that for a couple of years. I had to go down to South Parkway somewhere down in there with an officer, and we had to go in and tell a family that their son that lived in California had killed himself. I'd been with a doctor when he called me and said, I need your help. And we go over to his house, and he needs to tell his wife that her daddy had killed himself with a gun that the doctor had given him as a present. And there's nothing good about those situations. You don't know what to say. You don't have the answers. You don't have the answers to it because you immediately do, and you want to know where God is. It's real. And so you try to get it together. So there's 3 areas of trauma that we need to think about. And just by talking about this tonight will not heal if you're dealing with that, but it will help. The first thing about trauma is the shock of it all. Just like what we've been talking about. Traumatic experiences are more than stressful. They are what they shake your foundation. We're significantly shook up, and it leaves us significantly changed. It just does. Knocks our props out of, I've already said, we get where we're unable to cope. But you know what? if you look through the Bible, there are many examples of traumatic situation. Tamar was raped. Tamar, or Tamra, however you want to pronounce her. She was David's daughter, and she was raped by her half-brother Amnon. There was some murders. We go over in the New Testament. Y'all remember a guy by the name of Stephen as he was stoned to death? There's sexual abuse in our lives. There's crime victims. I almost get tired of watching the news, don't you? You know, and but I know that's what sells. There's car accidents. You know, people get up and they're going to work, or they're going to go out with somebody, and next thing you know, you got your loved ones gone. The Murrah Building type things, the bombings, and every night on the news, we have some type of shooting somewhere, and those are traumatic type things. It can be an accident at work. You know, I think it was last summer or maybe it was the summer before. You know, time runs together. That they were a workman downtown. They were digging, and it caved in on them, and it killed them. You're just making a living. You know, just making a living. Because I've already said, trauma visits us in the middle of a normal day. Yeah. A friend of my dad's in Oklahoma he was a rancher, and he had a herd of Texas Longhorns. Pretty cool, you know. But went out to feed one day, and that mean bull got him, gored him, and because of all of the bacteria on the horns of it, killed him. You know, that started out as just an accident, but it really ended up in trauma because of what happened so quickly. You know, someone can have a cancer diagnosis, and it starts out, and you're in grief for that, and everything's going well, but some cancers spread so fast and happen so quick that those come into trauma. This is making sense, the distinction, but the thing about a real trauma is the shock of it all. And you don't know what to do, and you don't have the answers, so I pronounce you normal, because that's what you are. You're just trying to get a grip on life. And then it's the injury, not to the person, but to you. Because trauma will injure us. It'll be a wounding probably in the deepest, innermost part of our heart. You know, and it takes a while. You know, the medical people call trauma, and that refers to a sudden significant injury. Well, you're not injured physically through the trauma that when you found, but you're injured in your heart, and it takes a while. So life does do us that way. Now, if you fall off a ladder and you hit your head, you take some pills, and your wife tells you you don't need to be climbing on the ladder anymore, right? As long as she doesn't know about it. Right? Oh, she's probably watching. But life sometimes will blindside you. You didn't see it coming, but it may not be trauma. It may be just something happened and they didn't die, or, you know, if you had grandkids, you know, like Jacob, he was a couple, 3 years ago, he was playing basketball at school. He loves basketball, went up for a layup, and somebody fell on him as they went down, broke his leg. We got the call that he broke his leg. I thought somebody was kidding me. And then they sent me the pictures, and I knew they wasn't. That wasn't traumatic, okay? But if you have those shocking type things that will enter your heart, normal death is not traumatic unless you don't grieve it out. You got to grieve your normal things out. And if you don't watch out, it will turn into trauma. Remember a couple of studies ago, we were talking about when we're in grief, we may need to say to somebody, I'm hurt. I may not act normal to you right now. You need to be patient with me. Just leave me alone. It just takes time. But with trauma, you can't even come up with that because you just kind of know. Y'all know about that, don't you? It's kind of about that. So you have the shock of it all. You have the injury to your heart and to your whole system. And thirdly, you have an inability to function properly. And that's okay. You know, it can affect you with physical difficulties. It can affect people with depression. They'll withdraw from relationships. They can be irrational fears, emotional swings. My brother, I don't say little anymore, I just say younger, he'll be turning 60 in October. About 5 years ago, he had a heart attack, Widowmaker, and he almost died. They shocked him 2 or 3 times, and after that, he didn't like to be by himself. That heart attack for him was a traumatic experience, and he said it really hurt. And I'm going to take his word on that. But he didn't want to be left alone, and when he was fearful. You know why he's fearful? Because he's afraid if he had another heart attack, there wouldn't be anybody there to help him. And so he had to work. That was traumatic because he had no previous record of any kind of heart trouble. But he did, that night they were going to go celebrate their anniversary and go to a Charlie Daniels concert. They were on the way in, and that's when he had it. See, trauma comes to you at any time. So we may get to where we're unable to cope with life, and we're trying to adjust to life that has changed. We're shocked, we're injured, and we're looking how life has been altered. And doggone it, we just don't like it. But we can't fix it. And it's part of learning how to cope, because trauma just overwhelms that capacity that we have. And, you know, we think about life, how life's going to be one way, but now just in an instant, it's changed. And here's what happens normally as humans. When things go wrong, our instinct is to try to assign blame. Oh, if I would have. Oh, if I had a friend that in Oklahoma who was a gasoline distributor, and after he shot himself, we thought about some of the things that he had said, and we didn't pick up on it. And you know, it wouldn't have mattered because we didn't know what was really going on in his. But you do those things. You're trying to come to terms with it. And look, don't do that to yourself, even though you will. Because at some point you need to stop it. Because you don't know what was going on in a person's life when something like that happens, and you don't know what someone was doing. Oh, if I had not let them gone and done that. You know that. See what I'm saying? It just sneaks up on us. So we end up sometimes with PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. And you know that you hear about that from the war veterans and abuse veterans and all of that. But what that is the inability to function normally. And you got to go get some help. And that's okay. Because trauma can surface even years later, and it can hang on for years later. So how do you really respond to trauma? Now, this is not a pill. This is just a suggestion. Can we get over it? Yeah, we can. But it takes time. But it comes back to that victim or overcomer. Now, standard psychology will tell you that you're a victim, that you always will be a victim, and there's nothing you can do about it. Christianity, in a Christian counseling setting, says, yes, you're a victim, but I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That you can become an overcomer. Because here's what victim thinking is. Here it goes. It's not only this way, but it goes something like this. I should never feel hurt. Life shouldn't be painful. We shouldn't lose things. We surely shouldn't bury people that are younger than us. Victim thinking sometimes thinks life is fair. I don't want to disappoint anybody, but it's not. Now, God is. In fact, God is more than fair. He should have let us go into hell, right? So, but life is not fair. Things happen. Bad things do happen to so-called good people. Sometimes victim thinking is, I should be able to protect my family from pain or loss. Yeah. And then sometimes victim thinks, they say, well, it's wrong to be angry. I shouldn't be mad at God about that. Look, if you're mad at God, he can handle it. And sometimes that's part of the process of grief, is just expressing your feelings. I think it's okay to tell God how you feel. I really do. Because sometimes in doing that, it's going to help you. It's going to help you. Now, overcomer, and this is where we want to get, realizes that we live in a sin-filled world, that none of us escape the consequences of the reality of sin because it affects us. I have a message that I've preached several places, but I never have felt led to share it with you here. But it's talking about unexplained tragedy. And I would suggest to you those happen, unexplained tragedies happen 99% of the time in these two areas, human evil or human error. For example, human error or human evil. Say a guy's working a second job at a convenience store and he's trying to provide for his family, and some guy comes in, robs him, and kills him. That's human evil. Okay? There's plenty of examples of that. Human error is you're driving down the road and you got seatbelt on, but some guy runs a stop sign, T-bones you, and kills your family. That's human error. See what I'm saying? Those, if you'll look, those will basically categorize most unexplained tragedies. And then there's going to be some you just say, I don't know. I just don't know. And you have to leave it there. And that's the process that we want to try to get to. But please hear this. Please hear this. Please be patient with those that are dealing with a traumatic experience, because it takes time. It's not a pill that you take. In fact, the worst thing we can do is tell somebody they should be over with it by now, because it takes time. But we're going to ask why. Why did this happen? Where was God? Psalm 10:1 says, "Why, Lord, do you stand afar off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble?" And if you've been through a traumatic situation, you know that feeling. You wonder where God is. But we need to be reminding ourselves that God is a God of comfort, even when we don't feel comforted. He sees our trouble, he sees our grief, and he will and does listen to the cry of the oppressed. His presence is very real. Even though joy has gone from our hearts and our dancing has turned to mourning. Someone said one of the greatest mistakes a person can make is to see the pain of trauma pain as a problem to be solved. Injury requires healing, not definition. Traumatic injury requires healing, and healing takes time. But you know, in all of that, I've shared these scriptures so many times with so many people, and mostly at gravesides. Psalm 34:18. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and save those who are crushed in spirit. And that's a good thing. But I like Psalm 147:3. He heals the brokenhearted, binds up their wounds. Trauma wounds our hearts. You know, you heard it said, time heals all hurts. Not always. Not always. But time will go on, and so should you. And so should you. Father, help us as we deal with life has changed. God, we know that, as people said in this crowd, there are some with deep hurts. I ask, Father, that you minister to them in a way only that you can. I thank you, Father, for your ministering spirit. Because, Father, you know what it's like to lose a loved one. You know what it's like to have a loved one go through a traumatic experience. Because one day, you let Jesus take the punishment of our sin. You turned your back because you could not look upon a sin, and he died in our place. So, Father, when we talk about you understanding everything about us, we know that you even understand how we feel during a time of trauma. And I ask it in Jesus'